and welcome to the Atlas Agency. I'm your host Brandon, excited today to be bringing you part 1 of my player card rundown series for the deluxe expansion, the Circle Undone, the 4th deluxe expansion for Arkham Horror the card game. Quick programming note before I start into these player cards. Ordinarily, when I do these player card rundowns, I don't split each expansion's player cards into multiple videos. I usually cover everything in one go. Just for this deluxe box, though, I'm going to be working through the box over multiple videos, 6 of them to be precise. I think this will make this easier on me for a couple of reasons, and these may release at kind of a slower pace, mainly because I'd like to get some experience playing with each of the investigators before discussing them. Mythos packs are easier to manage, so when we get to those, I'll still be doing just one video per pack. Now, with player card discussion, the natural way to split things up is usually by class, and that is what I plan on doing for parts 2 through 6 of this series, but there's a set of cards in the Circle Undone that runs across all of the classes that's not really served by being split up. So in this video I'll be discussing those cards, the set's 6 new tarot player cards, and then to round the video out, I'll also cover the box's 2 new basic weakness cards. So all that said, let's start talking about the tarot cards. Now, the 6 tarot cards that we're about to look at all follow a pretty strict pattern, so let's start with just one of them, Ace of Swords, as an example of that pattern. Ace of Swords is a level 1 Guardian asset that costs 3 resources to play. It has the Tarot trait, and it occupies a Tarot slot. That's a brand new asset slot that's introduced in the Circle Undone. Each investigator now has 1 Tarot slot that they can use to fill with assets like this one. There are 2 abilities on the card. The first is pretty simple. You get +1 combat. The second ability is the one that really ties all these tarot cards together. When the game begins, if Ace of Swords is in your opening hand, put it into play. So if you luck out and draw Ace of Swords in your opening hand, you get to start off with it on the table without having to spend the 3 resources or the action to play it. You will then have 1 fewer card in your opening hand, but other than that, it's basically a free jump start. All 6 of the tarot player cards follow this pattern very closely. They're all level 1, all 3 resources, and they can all start the game and play if they're in your opening hand. Aside from the class, the unique part of each tarot card is that first ability. 3 of the others just offer skill boosts for the remaining 3 skills. So for the Seekers, we have Death, number 13, which boosts Intellect. For the Rogues, there's the Moon, number 18, which boosts Agility. And for the Mystics, there's the 4 of Cups, which boosts Willpower. We'll get to the Survivors here in a bit. Theirs is a little bit different. I like all 4 of these cards. Even leaving aside the ability to start with a card in play, I think a passive skill boost on a card that doesn't conflict with any other asset slots is a useful option to have. Most bonuses like this are either on ally assets or accessory assets, which puts a natural limit on how many you can have going at once. Being able to pay 3 resources for a non-ally, non-accessory boost, I think is useful for plenty of investigators, especially anyone who needs to shore up a weaker primary stat. Like, for example, any 4 willpower mystic may want to consider 4 of Cups. Being able to start with a card in play is kind of a nice random bonus. It's fun but unreliable. For these 4 in particular, I feel like the value's still there, even if you don't luck out and get to play them for free. Before I move on to the next card, I should mention one of the major drawbacks of these tarot cards, and that's that none of them have any skill icons. So if you don't want to play the card, unless you have another card effect that gives you a use for it, there's nothing else you're going to be able to do with it. That also means that you're penalized for taking multiple tarot cards, although you're boosting your odds of seeing one in your opening hand. Once you have one in play, if you draw that second one, it's going to be a dead card. The Survivor Tarot card is a little different from the other classes. Instead of boosting a skill, their card, the 5 of Pentacles, gives you +1 health and +1 sanity. Now, unless you happen to be playing Calvin Wright, I don't think this one is worth picking up. If you're not lucky enough to draw this in your opening hand, 3 resources is a lot to pay for 1 health and 1 sanity, especially in the class that already has great soaks like Leather Coat, Cherished Keepsake, and Peter Sylvester. And yeah, survivors are better equipped than other classes to keep this card from being a dead card if they draw it late. They have ways to discard it to fuel other things, but I still think even if you do get it in your opening hand, +1 health and +1 sanity isn't impactful enough to really justify the deck slot, in contrast to the skill boosts, which I think are valuable enough. Assuming my investigator has access to level 1 cards from a second class, I'd be much more likely to pick up my off-class's skill-boosting tarot instead of this one. Now, if you're Calvin, then then obviously that changes the valuation on this significantly. Adding the extra health and sanity directly to his own totals, as opposed to a normal asset like leather coat that can just be assigned damage or horror, means you can raise his stats a little higher, or just have a better cushion to keep from killing him. All these tarot cards have great artwork, but I think Five of Pentacles is especially evocative. It's a little clearer in the full piece, but the hand that's drawing this tarot card out from the pocket here appears to be missing some fingers. Together with the flavor text, "It's time to rise up again," and the meaning behind the tarot card itself, to me this just tells a great story. A reversed Five of Pentacles signals an end to difficult times. I think this person's been through the ringer, probably had to burn their own house down, but they're clinging to this card as their promise that everything's going to come around for them in the end, and that promise is going to give them the resolve to make it through whatever tough task is next. All that's great, so I love the flavor side of this card. We get one neutral tarot asset, the Ace of Rods, the Fateful Step. Like the others, Ace of Rods is 1 experience to buy and 3 resources to play, but rather than giving you an ongoing skill boost or stat boost, this one has a one-time use, an ability that you can trigger. During your turn, remove Ace of Rods from the game. You may take an additional action this turn, during which you get +2 to each of your skills. Like the others, you get to put this into play for free when the game begins if it's in your opening hand. This is another one with great artwork, again conveying the relationship between the character and the tarot card, sort of weighing on his thoughts as he goes through his morning routine here. I'm not sold on the card itself. It's nice if you luck into it into your opening hand, but not so nice if you don't. If you're playing this normally, then there's no net action gain. Since it costs you an action to put the card into play, you're just basically banking a boosted action for later. I don't think I want to be paying 3 resources and an action to play this in exchange for a single extra action later to +2 boost. To me, that's just not a good deal. Maybe I might consider this if I was playing Survivor and I had something like Cornered that would give me an alternate way to spend this card without actually having to play it if I didn't luck out and get it in my opening hand. In general, though, this one is much more dependent on lucking out and getting it out for free, and so I don't see myself spending experience on this card. So that's all the player cards in the box that use the tarot slot. Next up, we have the basic weaknesses. The Circle Undone comes with 2 new basic weakness cards, and you get 2 copies of each of these cards. The first one we're going to look at actually bridges the gap between the tarot player card discussion and the weakness discussion, because it's a tarot weakness. The Tower, number 16, Circumstances Beyond Your Control. The Tower is an asset that costs 4 resources to play, Omen and Tarot traits. It occupies the tarot slot, so if you already have a tarot card in play when you play it, it's going to boot that other card to your discard pile. You cannot commit cards to skill tests while the Tower is in your hand. If the Tower is drawn in your opening hand during setup, before or after taking a mulligan, you cannot replace it. It must stay in your opening hand. So that's sort of the parallel to the tarot player card's ability to be played for free if they're in your opening hand. Ordinarily, a weakness in your opening hand gets replaced and shuffled back into your deck, but if your opening hand has the Tower, you're just stuck with it. The negative effect, preventing you from committing cards, applies only while it's in your hand. The Tower doesn't do anything after you've played it. It takes up the tarot slot while it's in play, but there's nothing preventing you from playing another tarot card afterwards to replace it in your tarot slot if you happen to draw another one. Though honestly, since the player tarot cards all cost experience, I think if you got the Tower as your initial basic weakness, you might consider just steering away from buying the player tarot cards entirely. Unless the tarot was really important to you for some reason, if you got the Tower you could just develop your deck in a different direction and not have to worry about that conflict. Though looking back to Ace of Rods for a second, I will say that because that one is consumed upon use, it plays a little better than the others alongside the Tower. If you get Ace of Rods before the Tower shows up, you could just use it up, take that free action before you have to play the Tower. As weaknesses go, the Tower seems to me to be fairly harsh. First off, there's the opening hand rule, which is a drawback no other weakness currently has to contend with. If you happen to draw this to start, that gives you a smaller opening hand, and if it's before your mulligan, then it reduces your overall mulligan potential. Even Indebted, which hits you at the start of every game, at least doesn't hamper your opening hand like that, and then you have to contend with the effect applying from turn 1 as well. It's 4 resources and an action to play it and get rid of it. 4 resources is a lot to spend on a weakness. That's almost all of your starting resources if you attempt to deal with this immediately. Twice as many resources as Indebted would cost you, and plenty of people strongly dislike Indebted. Maybe you can afford to delay dealing with this, but I think most investigators are going to be inhibited enough by it that they'll want to get rid of it sooner rather than later. Skill-based investigators like Min and Silas are going to be especially hard hit by this, although heavier on skills and lighter on assets could mean that paying for resources for this is less of a setback than it might be for an asset-heavy investigator. Late game, I think it's going to depend on circumstances. Playing it only takes one action, so if you can afford it when you draw it, it may be less disruptive than one of the 2 actions to discard weaknesses, like Internal Injury, and there may be times when you can get away with not playing it at all. On the other hand, if you draw it when you have no money and a difficult enemy engaged with you, suddenly losing your ability to commit cards could spell disaster for you. Overall, I think the tower could have been toned down slightly. 3 resources probably would have still been fine, and actually would have had a nice symmetry with the other tarot cards since they all cost 3, but at least I like the fact that we got a weakness with a thematic tie-in to the set. And finally, we have one other basic weakness in this box, one that's not a tarot, but that still has a little bit of that divination flavor, and that's the 13th Vision. This card is actually from one of 2 card design councils from the 2017 Arkham Knights event, so it's a player design card, which as far as I know is a first. As I understand it, the way it's worked, at Arkham Knights each of the last 2 years, they've randomly selected groups of attendees to get to be on these card design councils. The councils collaborate there at the event to design a new card, with some measure of supervision from FFG during the design session. Then FFG quickly prints beta copies of the 2 cards to distribute to everyone at the event, and then the idea is, after some internal testing and tweaking, the cards one day see print in a normal expansion. One of the 2 cards from 2017 was the 13th Vision, which has now made it into the game with the Circle Undone, and we get 2 copies of this weakness in the box. The printed version we get in Circle Undone has a few minor changes from the Card Council's version. Its trait has changed from Madness to Omen, its card type has changed from Asset to Treachery, and it's lost its subtitle, which had been Seen in Flames. Its text says, Revelation, put the 13th Vision into play in your threat area. Investigators at your location fail ties during skill tests. Then, for 2 actions, you can discard it from play. The original version had a sentence that said it could only leave play by that ability. That sentence didn't make the final version, though at the moment I can't think of any player card that would give you an alternate way of booting it out of play. Alter Fate can't target it because it's a weakness. Anyway, all those changes make sense to me, and it still feels like the card that the Council designed. I don't know that this weakness has been very well received. Many have pointed out that it's, in most situations, functionally very similar to the basic weakness Haunted from the core set, except worse because it affects all investigators at your location, not just you. Haunted gives you -1 to each of your skills, and like the 13th Vision, takes 2 actions to discard. Failing on a tie is pretty similar to getting a -1. There are some situations where the difference matters. If the difficulty of the test is 0, 13th Vision could make you fail it when Haunted wouldn't, or if you're running a card that cares about, say, passing a test by 2 or more, Haunted makes that harder, but 13th Vision doesn't. But in most cases, the impact is the same. So I think it's a fair criticism to say this card isn't especially exciting because it's too similar to a weakness that we've had since day 1. I think it would have been good for this to have at least had a different method of getting rid of it, not just the same 2 actions to discard the card that Haunted has. On the other hand, though, it is what the Card Council came up with, and I think if you're going to do these card design councils, then unless the resulting card has real problems, you're kind of obligated to print something pretty close to what the players came up with. Balance tweaks are fair game, but balance-wise this card was fine, so to me, releasing it in this form seems like the right way to go. It may be a little meaner than Haunted, but I think it's fine and really inevitable that weaknesses are going to have some variance in terms of their difficulty. So we have one other player design card from Arkham Knights 2017, the Council's Coffer, which is still outstanding. That one was a level 2 card, so it's not surprising to me that we didn't see it in this deluxe box. Deluxe box cards usually cap out at level 1. I do kind of expect that it may turn up later in this cycle. That'll do it for part 1 of this series. I have a hunch that in part 2, I'll be looking at the other 3 new Seeker player cards from the Circle Undone, as well as the new Seeker Investigator, Joe Diamond. I hope you'll join me for that. Until then, thanks for watching the Atlas Agency, and good luck in your own investigations of the Circle Undone.